They say racism in America was born on Southern plantations, that it was a regional sickness tied only to cotton, tobacco, and Confederate flags. But what if I told you it started long before that, before the Declaration of Independence, before George Washington, before there was even a United States? The roots of America's racial divide were planted deliberately by British colonial rulers. And it wasn't by accident, it was by design. In the early 1600s, when the British Empire first began colonizing North America, slavery wasn't yet the racial institution we now associate with American history. Believe it or not, white indentured servants and black Africans often worked side by side. Both were exploited, both were poor, and both had the potential, however slim, to earn freedom. In Virginia, Maryland, and the Carolinas, black men owned land. Some even owned white indentured servants. In courts, some black people could testify. Others gained their freedom after serving a fixed term of labor. There were no racial laws written in stone. Not yet. In fact, race wasn't even the main dividing line. Class was. But this fragile balance was short-lived, because for the British elite, the sight of poor whites and poor blacks organizing together was a threat, an existential one. Then came 1676. The colony of Virginia exploded in rebellion. Nathaniel Bacon, a wealthy but rebellious colonist, led a violent uprising of both black and white workers against the colonial ruling class. The rebellion didn't last, but it sent shockwaves through the British authorities. Why? Because it proved that unity between the poor, regardless of skin color, could overthrow the powerful. That was unacceptable to the crown. So the British responded not just with force, but with something far more enduring: a system. They rewrote the laws, they rewrote society. They divided humanity by skin color, and for the first time, white became a legal identity, not just a description, but a social weapon. The Virginia Slave Codes of 1705 formally declared that black people, regardless of their status, could be held as lifelong slaves. No more rights, no more land, no more legal recourse. Meanwhile, white indentured servants were given new protections. Their path to freedom was shortened, their status elevated, and most importantly, they were told, "You're not rich, but at least you're not black." It was psychological warfare. Divide and conquer, British Empire style. They created a new class, poor whites, and gave them just enough privilege to ensure they'd never unite with black workers again. It was a bribe, a toxic illusion of superiority, and it worked. From that moment on, whiteness became a shield, and blackness became a sentence. But here's what they never teach you in school: whiteness, as we understand it today, didn't even exist before British colonialism. People were English, Irish, Scottish, African, Christian, or Muslim. But white, that identity was manufactured. The British Empire crafted it not as culture, but as control. A hierarchy, a ladder. And skin color was the rungs. This wasn't evolution. This was policy. The British colonists understood that a racial caste system would ensure economic dominance. Because if the poor could be turned against each other, they would never turn against the people at the top. By the 1700s, British colonial rule had turned slavery into a racial institution, something no other European empire had done at this scale. The Spanish enslaved Africans, yes, the Portuguese did too. But the British made slavery racially absolute, generational, hereditary, permanent. If your skin was black, you were born a slave. If your skin was white, you were born free. It didn't matter your intelligence, your virtue, your labor, your soul. This is where the American story of race truly begins, not with the Civil War, but with the British Empire's calculated manipulation of identity. And they didn't stop there. Religion became another tool in their arsenal. The British Church began preaching that Africans were heathens, that slavery was a divine duty to civilize them. Missionaries baptized enslaved people, but passed laws stating that Christianity did not make them free. Let that sink in. They rewrote religion to maintain slavery. They modified scripture to justify oppression. It wasn't just about labor. It was about ideology, control of the body and the mind. By the time of the American Revolution, the southern colonies were fully dependent on slave labor. But here's the truth: most textbooks leave out British merchants, British ships, and British banks were the financial engine behind that system. London insurance companies insured slave ships. British investors financed plantations. British law protected slave owners' wealth, and British ports, like Liverpool and Bristol, thrived off the trade of black lives. The empire made billions, and in exchange, America inherited a blueprint: racial capitalism. After the Revolution, America claimed independence from British rule, but it did not break from British ideology. In fact, the newly formed U.S. government kept many of the British colonial laws intact. Slavery expanded westward, native peoples were displaced, and the racial hierarchy became part of the American DNA. When the cotton gin was invented in 1793, slavery surged, the demand for enslaved labor exploded. And yet, many Americans forget the foundations were already there, laid carefully by British lawmakers a century earlier. Fast forward to 1865. Slavery ends, but Jim Crow laws rise across the South. Segregation becomes a new weapon, and still, at its core, it echoes the original British design. Divide the working class. Criminalize blackness. Even in the North, where slavery was abolished earlier, banks redlined black neighborhoods. Schools were segregated, jobs were denied, and black veterans returned from world wars only to face lynching and discrimination. The racial divide was no longer just legal. It was social, cultural, economic, and every layer traced back to British colonial policy. Today, we see the consequences in everything from policing to healthcare, from education to housing. Systemic racism isn't a bug in the American system. It's a feature, an inherited one. The illusion is that it just happened. That racism is some tragic accident of American history. But the truth is far darker. It was planted, nurtured, legislated, codified, and passed down generation to generation, not by accident, but by imperial strategy. The British Empire didn't just conquer land. It conquered minds, it redefined human worth, it installed a social virus based on skin color and then exported it to its colonies. And America became its most successful host. So the next time someone asks, why is America still so divided? Tell them, it began before this country was born. Tell them the scars are older than the stars and stripes. Tell them it was the British who taught us how to hate based on color. But also remember this, history is not destiny. What was created by law can be dismantled by truth. What was passed down through generations can be unlearned. And what was used to divide can become the reason we unite. But only if we're willing to confront it, name it, expose it, and never forget where it started. If you found this story revealing, if you believe in unmasking history, then take a moment to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share the truth. Because the fight for justice begins with memory. And memory begins with honesty. This is the history they never taught you. And it's time the world finally hears it.